Establishing our final colony was a rather tedious affair. Basically, we just lured these native barbarians out to the coastline to crush their forces with our ballistic ships. This single road turned into a literal graveyard, with dozens upon dozens of bodies being stacked here. It was an exhaustingly close victory, and the beginning of our rather extensive conflict with these barbarian tribes known as the Germanic people. However, this story deserves its own video, meaning you won't hear about this expedition for quite a while. Instead, let's go back to our capital, where tension between us and the Romans was larger than ever before. They already controlled land in both Greece and Africa, but their Macedonian allies in Gaul basically served as an extension of their will, having conquered most of Gaul slowly surrounding Diospolis, our sacred city. Same could be said for Antigonus Gonatas, the ruler of Macedon, who had led a massive host through their already subdued Thracian holdings, all the way into Illyria and Dacia. Our situation was getting worse by the second. Most of our colonies were in outroar, forcing us to send multiple statesmen on diplomatic missions to enhance public order. It was rather expensive, slowing down the construction of our highly desired fleets. On the other hand, we at last established peace with the Carthaginians in hiding at the Balearic Isles, allowing their merchants to trade at our many ports. Fortunately for us, the Romans had pissed off the Ptolemaic rulers of Egypt, starting a major conflict in northern Africa, where the Romans used superior siege equipment and technology to breach the walls of Cyrene and sack the city. This attack made the Romans extremely rich, but also distracted them from their western and Greek borders. And with Antigonus Gonatas in Dacia, this was the perfect time to strike, if he wanted a chance to succeed at least. So by the spring of 264 BC, as the Macedonian raiding party was harassing our trade lanes, we retaliated, starting the Mediterranean War. Or Second Punic War, depending on how you look at it, with us switching sides. But don't worry, we Athenians would never initiate this massive conflict without a plan of attack. Glaucus, the now most senior and experienced commander in the entire nation, had returned to Athens, where he took command of the defenders of Greece's army, with the intention of setting sail straight past the almost impregnable city of Pella into Thrace, hoping to crush the Macedonian economy before the massive host of Macedonians returned from their campaign in the north. This would obviously leave Athens vulnerable, with only our client states to defend it. However, this was where our unrivaled naval power was gonna prove its value. We would use our newly constructed fleet to kick the Romans out of Greece. Such a strike would definitely cause a reaction from the devious neighbor of ours. Hence, we had also formed a new fleet at New Athens. Although it was inferior to our other fleets, it had the most difficult task in securing Caralis. This was vital, as we could straight up cut off the Roman forces from Africa, meaning Glaucus only had to worry about the Macedonians. Additionally, the Macedonian puppets joined the war shortly after, meaning our sacred city was on high alert. Luckily, we already had a massive host to defend the city, as well as Socrates, the famed commander from the Iberian Wars, on standby in case the situation developed out of hand. With that said, let's begin the conflict at Apollonia, where our mighty ballistae blasted the shit out of the Romans, forcing them to abandon the town, allowing us to liberate the fallen Epirus kingdom to defend the western coast. After the battle, we took a quick look at the city of Thrace, but figured such an attack was useless without replenishing. We established trade with the other Greek nations and actually tried to do the same with the Iceni, as I feared they would jump on our weakened state. But they refused, making us fear for the worst. This was mainly why Cleisthenes stayed in Britannia instead of turning to this large-scale conflict across the Mediterranean. Also, it didn't take long for our fears to become a reality. Basically, this is the lay of the land now, with us having 4 different theaters of war. 5 if you count the colonization efforts in Germania. Originally, the plan was to have the colony founded already, so it could fund our war efforts against the Romans and Macedonians. But the resistance from the Germans proved to be more challenging than expected, leaving us mostly reliant on Mauritania and Greece itself. They had to be protected at all costs. Some good news was that the Macedonian ally in Dendari, despite being a landlocked nation, feared our power so much they actually switched sides, becoming a client state of ours. This was huge, as it literally denied the Macedonians from taking the short and easy route back to Thrace. This came at the perfect time, as Glaucus reached Macedonian shores uncontested, meaning he could lead the defenders of Greece straight to Apollonia and Pontica, where he split his infantry into 3 separate groups to spread out the attack, with his cavalry all the way on the left. This meant once the battle began just outside the town, our cavalry rushed in, taking out the defending skirmishers, allowing our spearmen to box in the rest. By now these lands had already been Hellenized, meaning we merely occupied the settlement. This fact also allowed us to replenish our purely Greek army. This conquest unintentionally also granted us vision over the western part of the Black Sea, meaning we could establish trade routes with both the Scythians and Cimmerians. Nevertheless, Glaucus continued his lightning strike, securing the crucial slave resource from Odysseus, with a fleet defending Apollonia. From here we discovered the Macedonians were rapidly approaching Thrace, fighting their way through Dacian and Illyrian territory to get back and defend their holdings. If the Dacians held the line for long enough, we might actually be able to take the fortification of Philippopolis. To ensure the barbarians were willing to assist our cause, we arranged a marriage between our 2 faction leaders, even though our own faction leader was quite old in comparison. This would help strengthen our ties and perhaps even secure the north, despite this being arranged with non-Greek savages. Further west, the Romans seemed to have legions marching through the desert. But you know what they say in chess? If your opponent is attacking on the flanks, counterattack through the middle, which we did with this assault on Caralis. But unlike our many other fleets, this one actually didn't have any ballistic ships, meaning we were tactically limited to a direct assault through the heavily fortified port. A head-on assault. It began with us burning down the defensive ballistae emplacements, meaning we could cruise into the port itself, where no more than 3 of our ships could offload their marines at a time. This was an incredibly brutal assault with hundreds of our marines dying on the sand. A single unit heroically passed through the initial engagement, halting the approach of the rest of the city militia, meaning as more of our own units landed, the more ground we'd gain. As the assault progressed, we lured the Massalians back into the port, where we could surround and finish off whatever units they had left with our skirmishers and overwhelming numbers, in confined space. Overall, it was a close victory that allowed us to occupy this strategically crucial port. Of course, with the many casualties we sustained, we had to rebuild our fleet. With this position, we were able to intercept several Roman army transports, such as this attack here, where our ships formed up in 2 ranks. Here it was only the first rank that approached the Romans, ramming one transport to then quickly sail deeper into the Roman lines, all the way until their ships sailed no more. Once the battle was over, the fleet merely returned to Caralis, where they would wait for other opportunities to strike. Mostly we avoided the Massalian fleet, but whenever the Romans exposed themselves, we swiftly reacted with decisive strikes. Even their proper ships weren't enough to rival our superior power. That was the case until the 3rd interception, where we caught 2 armies worth of transports as well as a minor fleet sailing for Greece. We used the same 2 ranks as from the first battle, but after slicing through the first army, our first line split up into 2 parts, one to deal with the proper fleet, and another dealing with the remaining transports. This turned out to be a mistake, as this actually allowed the Romans to overwhelm our ships on both engagements, forcing us to activate our second line. The last Roman transports were more densely formed, meaning we could simply surround them. Once a transport isolated itself, we rammed it, taking out the rest one by one. Despite our incredible victory, which probably saved Greece from a Roman invasion, our casualties were severe enough for our fleet to stand down for quite a bit. Especially as the money we usually spent on rebuilding the fleet was being invested into the northern colonies. Ever since the Iceni declared war on us again, we plotted to kick them out of Britannia entirely. By this point we had accumulated 1 complete army. Combine that with this smaller mobile militia and Cleisthenes' fleet to patrol the coastal settlements from potential Iceni naval raids, we could actually take the last Iceni settlement, gaining more farmland in the process. From here, the plan was to mobilize a large-scale invasion from Britannia into Gaul itself, defeating the Iceni for good, and then moving on to the Massalians, who by now were roaming the lands of Diospolis. Time was of the essence. Speaking of time, back in Thrace the Macedonians were running full force through Dacia, burning their towns and villages in the process. We had to take Philippopolis and fast if we were to have a chance to survive these numbers. We took it after a prolonged siege just in time as well, as our Dacian allies were down to just one settlement. This complicated things as we now were allied through matrimony. We couldn't just sit around letting them be destroyed. Neither did we have the numbers to handle all the Macedonian numbers on the field. Of course, the original plan was for this swift strike through Thrace to cripple the Macedonians, but their own expedition into Illyria had given them enough land to resist our scheme. So we escalated our attack with a second fleet blockading Pella and thus denying them trade. Diplomatically, we pulled off another trick by persuading another of the Macedonian client states in the north to betray their overlords. All because they feared our strength. Sadly, our blockade was tested shortly after it was formed. Here the Macedonians outsmarted us, attacking the fleet from two separate directions. We turned all our largest ships to face theirs while the smaller ships dealt with their transports. But where one engagement was going swimmingly, the other was devastating. Our Heptares warships were too slow, allowing the Macedonians to sail around and ram our ships into ruin. Even our flagship holding our admiral was destroyed. Eventually the smaller ships returned to finish off the rest, but by that point we had lost way too many ships and marines. It didn't stop us from blockading the capital though, but we had to be very careful after that. Glaucus on the other hand was getting ready to march into Dacia, up until our barbarian client barrier state told us the Macedonians had passed through their lines entering Thrace. We sent out the same champion who previously was spying in Anatolia to discover most of the Macedonians were far closer than expected. We had to make a choice of either fighting at Philippopolis or marching north to save the Dacians. We had successfully executed the plan we set out to perform, but now it was the Macedonians who were on the offensive.